In today's video, we are going to input some PDF invoice data onto an Excel sheet using VBA user form. Once done, we will also figure out a way to verify and match invoice amounts with our agreed rates using manual formulas and then using VBA. Keep in mind that this is not an exhaustive tutorial on how to use user forms. We will only cover the topics that are needed to make this user form work. Let's look at the PDF invoices and the data we will need to extract from them to our Excel file. All 4 PDF files we have are in similar format, and relevant information includes invoice number. So you have invoice number here, you have the order date, you have customer name, item description, units, and finally the total dollar amount. That is right here. Let me open up another one, and it's very similar to this one. Let's go back to Excel and define the column name. So let me open up an empty Excel file. Make sure to save this as an XLSM format, as we will store the VBA macros and the user form in this same file. Let's start adding the column names. So let me add the column names. I like to use underscores. You can also use camel casing or Pascal casing as well, in which case you would capitalize start of each word. Right, so we got the columns that we need. Let's hit Alt F11 to open the VBA window. From Insert, click on User Form, and you will see a blank canvas where we will begin our work. Then you have a toolbox. So you can select the objects from here. So for example, you have a label, you have text box, comma box, and you have a frame, command button, so on and so forth. Let's rename our user form and update the caption as well. So let's select the user form, and on the left side, you will see the options to rename. So let's rename our user form. All right, so let's update the caption as well. Let's just say it add data to Excel. While working with user forms, it's very important to rename items properly. Let's add a frame to our user form. So from your toolbox, click on frame, and here you are able to draw it. So let's just draw it and fill the screen. Let's make this a bit bigger, this as well. Right, so the good thing about frame is that everything that you will do will be on the frame. So if you just want to move those items, you can just move the frame and everything else will move with it. Let's rename our frame. Let's call it FRA invoices. So from left hand side, let's add the name to FRA invoices. We can update the caption as well. So we can say add invoices, where FRA stands for the frame. Naming conventions for common VBA user form items are here, which we will try to use today. So let me open this web page quickly. Let me zoom in a bit. So these are the prefixes, and it will also show you how to use them. So for example, we used frame right now. So we use FRA and then whatever the value is. Similarly, for label, we will use LBL. For text box, we will use TXT. For command button, we will use CMD. You will very quickly see why naming these are very important in user form. Let's create some label boxes and text boxes and rename them accordingly. Create a label, simply select the A that says label. Let's draw it a bit here, and then you will need to rename them and add the caption as well. So we will do this for invoice number, date, customer name, item unit, total amount. I'm just going to fast forward this at 2x speed, so you don't have to see all of the boring process. Now let's create some text boxes as well. For creating a text box, we'll just select the text box from the toolbox. We will draw it in a similar way that you draw the label. We will similarly rename these. So we are going to use TXT for text box naming. So we'll say TXT invoice number. Okay, all done. Now you can see that our user form is now shaping up a bit. If we click on run, we can see that our user form loads and shows the relevant fields. Keep in mind that right now there's nothing coded behind this user form. So you can enter the information in here, but nothing will happen because you don't have any code behind it, or you don't even have the button that will enter this information onto the Excel file. So let me close this and let's go back to the VBA window. You can access the code behind your user form by double clicking on the user form itself. So for example, if I double click on the gray area here, it will create a new code block. And here you can add your code in it. So each time you double click to see the code, it will create a code block, which you can simply remove. So let's go back to our user form and let's add a command button to enter the data into Excel line once we are done. So we're going to add a command button. Command button is somewhere around here. So you have this one. Let's add it here and let's call it enter data. We had CMD for command button. Let's call it enter data. Let's update the caption as well. Enter data. You can change the color etc. from here. So for example, you want this to be in this format, you can do that. So let's change the fore color, and you see you can do this as well. Great. Now let's double click on this, and you can see a code block has been generated that says your button name and then followed by underscore click. So our button name was cmd command enter data underscore click. So it means that this code block will run each time when this button is clicked. These are called workbook events. If you click on the drop down, it will show you all of the workbook events that are available. So you can select any of these. So what it's telling you is that whatever event is selected, your code will run whenever that event occurs. So for example, it could be a key up, key down. It could run when you press enter. It could run when you press click or double click, so on and so forth. So for our case, we will just keep it at click. Here we will add our code block. Our first step would be to figure out what row to enter data in. We want to enter data in last available row. So we need to find last row. I have done a detailed video on multiple ways of finding last row. Link should be on the screen somewhere. But now we will simply come from last row to the top, and whatever row it finds, we will just add +1 in it. And that will be our row for entering data. This method assumes that we will always have information for all fields and there will be no missing data. That's not your case. We will need to look for alternate methods. Let's declare our first variable as LR. So let's add an indent here, and let's call it dim. Dim is for dimension. Any variable that you're going to use, you will have to declare it by using dim. So you say dim, then a variable name, and then you type the data type. So we will use integer for this one. An integer data type can hold between -38,000 to +38,000 approximately. So if your data set exceeds where last row is say 50,000, you will need to use double as data type. For this example, integer works just as fine. You can modify as per your own case. Keep in mind that the bigger data type that you're using will consume more memory. If you do not know what data type should be used, you can just use variant. That way VBA will automatically figure out what data type should be. Right, so let's add the code first. So we will say LR equals range. We'll start from bottom up. So let's say range 1048576.end Excel up. And then whatever the row is, store the row for it and then add 1 in it. So we'll do a +1 in it. So this will store our last row. You can also check this from your ImageNet window by adding a question mark and then adding your code line. And right now it's telling you the result is 2 because it's going up from here and then it's going 1 row down. So our last row right now is 2, which is correct. Next, we will use cells to enter value into active row and column. So let's open up cells and let's see what parameters it accepts. So it accepts a row index and a column index. So our row index will be LR because that is the row we want the data to go in. And for column index, let's just use 1 for column 1. And then we say dot value. And now comes the important part. We will put this equals to value we stored in text box with invoice number name. So if we go back to UserForm, the value we want this to pick from is from this text box, which was invoice number. Go back to our code. So we want to access the text box value, put it in cell A2 using cells LR1.value. This is where our naming convention will be very helpful. So let's type txt, and as soon as we press Control space, this will access our IntelliSense. From here, we will simply pick our relevant value, which is txt invoice number. So let's pick that one and say dot value. So what this will do is it will pick value from txt invoice number box and put it in cell A2. We will do the same for column B through F. So stick with me while I do it. Keep in mind that we have hard-coded the column numbers for now. So you can see 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. We will fix this later on. Right, so once done, we will add a last line of code as unload me, which basically closes the user form. Me in this case represents the user form itself. So unload me means close the user form. Now it's time to test our code. So let's save it. Control S to save the code. And let's run our macro by pressing F5 or the run button here. And let's start adding some dummy values. Once we know that the VBA user form works, we will start adding the actual invoice values from the PDF invoices. Click on enter data. And you can see the data is reflected in the correct columns. Alright, so let's add another record just to see if our user form picks the correct row. Click on run again. And good enough. we can see our user form picks up the correct row and it does not overwrite our existing data. Great. Our basic user form code is set up and in a working condition. Now, let's assume we add a column somewhere in our input data. Our user form will break. For example, let's add a column here, add column B. I'm just going to call it extra column. Now let's try to run our user form again to see if it still works or not. And as you can see, our data is all over the place and it's still adding the information in the older column structure. So it's not taking into account the new column which we added here. This data should ideally be like this. Well, fret not. Let's make our code a bit more dynamic to solve this issue. Right, so let's step back to VBA. Right, so the problem that is occurring is because of these hard-coded column numbers here. So as you can see, this is column number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And now since the structure has changed, it's not the case anymore. Right, so we can use the match function of Excel to pick up the column number. So for example, if we are doing it in Excel, we do something like this. So let's say match, lookup value, let's say we just want to look up the column number. The lookup array is going to be row 1. The match type should be exact match. So this should give me the row number. And let's say if I just change this to customer name, I just want to change the lookup value to customer name. This should give me the column number of the customer name column, which is 4. Great. This means that we are able to dynamically pull the column number using match function. Any Excel function that you want to use inside of VBA, you can just use it using application.worksheet function dot whatever the function you want to use. So for example, if I scroll this a bit down, I should be able to see all of the functions we normally use in Excel. So what I want to use is match. So let's do that. Let's see if we are able to test this inside of immediate window. I'm just going to build the formula here. Let's maximize it. So the first argument we want to give is items as the lookup value. The second argument was the row where we want to look at. So we will get rows 1 through 1. I hope I am giving it in correct format. And the last argument was the match type, which we were gonna say 0 as exact match. So let's click on enter. This should give me 5 as my result. And you can see I have 5 here, which means that if I know what the column name is, I am able to figure out the column number using match function dynamically. Right, so let's use this to start modifying our code. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add column numbers and application.worksheet function.match here. I'm going to do this at 2x speed. Once I'm done, I will explain it a bit. Alright, so we are able to make our code dynamic. So let me save the code and let's test the code again. Run our macro and let's add some dummy information. So let's say invoice number 7. Date is for today. Customer name is Dan again. Dan really likes pencils. So let's give 10 as units and 10,000 as total cost. Click on enter data. And you can see even with the new column added, we still get our information in the correct places. So let's say we don't need this column anymore. So let me remove this. And once again, let's test our code to see if it is truly dynamic or not. So let's do this again quickly. 7, days, date, Dan, pencils, 5 and 5,000. And voila, our values are in the correct column. So it means that our code is pretty much dynamic now. There's actually a better way to write these line of code without having to repeat these lines each time. Stick with me till the end of the video to find out. Great. Let's keep moving. So the next thing we want to do is we want to able to figure out a way where as soon as we enter information for our invoice, we are able to match or audit the invoice amount with the agreed rates we have with us already as per our order rates and quantity. So let me add a new tab here and let's set up some rates here. We already have the units inside of the invoice. So let me open up the invoice again just for reference. So this was the invoice we have. So let me add the information onto our Excel file. So let's add it. Let me pull up the PDF. So it's gonna go here and let's run a macro. The easiest way to call a user form is through a macro. So let's do that. So let's go back to our VBA screen. And here we will insert a module. Let's call it call user form. And this will be pretty simple. We will simply create a subroutine. Let's call it display user form. And here we will simply say load. and here we will give the user form name, that was add data to Excel, right? And then we will simply say add data to Excel dot show, and this will load up our user form. So save it, go back to Excel. In the developer tab, click on macros, click on this workbook, and as soon as you press or run this macro, we should be able to see the user form. Great, we are able to run the user form through our macro. We can assign a button or assign or add it here in the taskbar or the ribbon here as well. So let's start adding the information. So our invoice number is 110. Invoice date is 6/9/2024. Customer name is David. The item description we have is cell phone. Invoice address is 27. The total amount it billed us is 6,075. Let's click on enter data and we have our information entered. Now what we can do is we can simply use XLOOKUP to pick up prices for the cell phone. So let's do that. Right, so the price is 225. We can simply multiply this with the units. And then we will simply do is let's just enclose these in parentheses and subtract the total invoiced amount. And here we get 0, which means that the total billed amount by the invoice is matching with the amount we have as per the unit cost of cell phones. What about we figure out a way where as soon as we enter invoice information, we are able to see if the amount that is being invoiced is correct or it has some discrepancy, which we can figure out later and then check with the carrier. For our next step, we would like to figure out a way to incorporate our XLOOKUP within VBA instead of manually copy-pasting formula each time. Let's copy and paste our XLOOKUP formula in a new module and try to replicate this in VBA. Within our VBA screen, we are going to click on Insert within the Module section, click on Module to create a new module. Let's copy the XLOOKUP formula. Let's create a new subroutine. So we'll say test lookup. Press and enter. It will add empty parentheses and an end sub. Let's add some indentation so we can do some formatting. And I'm just going to comment this out. This will act as our reference point that this is what we need to achieve using VBA. As a first step, let's rename our internal sheet names. This makes it much easier to refer to our sheets. So each sheet or tab has two names. One is outside of parentheses. So you can see here, if you look at sheet 1 tab, there is the sheet 1 here. We have one name that is sheet 4 and within round parentheses we have sheet 1. Similarly for sheet 2 we have sheet 5 outside of parentheses. So the name that is outside of parentheses is the code name or the internal sheet name, and the one that is in the parentheses, this is the tab name which you can see in the Excel interface. So let's rename these. So I'm going to call this one sheet 1 as main sheet. To rename these, you can simply come to the left hand side and within the properties just add the name here, and you can see now the name has changed. And the second one is sheet 2. So let's rename this as well. Let's call it rates sheet. Okay, so we have a main sheet and we have a rate sheet. Let's start building up replication of XLOOKUP formula. For now, we are using VLOOKUP since not every Excel user will have XLOOKUP. You can update this at your end accordingly if you have XLOOKUP in your Excel. Both function very similarly, you just need to update the arguments accordingly. Let's figure out what row we are working on. So we will use AR as variable for active row and store active row or cell in it. So let's declare a new variable dim AR as integer and AR equals active cell dot row. Great. Once done, we say active cell dot formula. So anytime you're adding a formula, you will use active cell dot formula instead of active cell dot value, which you normally use. So let's start opening up VLOOKUP so we can see what argument it accepts. I just forgot. Anytime you want to use a formula from Excel, you will have to add application.worksheet function. The first argument for the VLOOKUP is normally the lookup value you want to look for. So let's give it. So this is D8 if we are on row 8. So for example, if we have this row here, our lookup value will be D8, similarly to what we have in XLOOKUP. So we can hard code this value here, but that's not a good practice. So let's figure out a different way to do this. We'll be using cells to give this value. Cells uses row index and column index. We already have row index in AR, which is where we store the active row. So let's give it. And for column index, we are going to hard code this for now. So the lookup value is D. So this is 4th column. So let's give 4 as column. And then we say value. This is our first parameter. Second parameter in VLOOKUP is the lookup range, which is in our rates tab and will be from A1 to B6. So let's give that. So we say range. I'm just going to show you as well. So we have range A1 through B6. So let's give that range. I'm just going to add base underscore so we can add to new line. Hopefully this works. Range A1 through B6. And the third parameter is the column number that we need. We need column number 2. Let's give that, because what we are looking for is the unit cost of cell phone, which is in column 2 of our VLOOKUP table. And the last argument is false for exact match. So let's give that. And this should close our VLOOKUP formula. Let's try to run it and see if this works. Okay, it seems like we are getting an error that says runtime error, unable to get VLOOKUP property. The problem is that we are dealing with two different sheets or tabs. As you can see, the lookup value is in sheet 1 tab and the area where it needs to look up is in sheet 2 tab. And as you can see here, we did not specify any sheet name or did not tell VBA where to look from what value. Let's fix that. So let's use the code names for our VBA files. Before cells, we will simply say main sheet because the lookup value is gonna come from main sheet. So let's type main, and if we press Control space, we will get some IntelliSense. Alright, so I'm gonna add dot cells, and for some reason it has moved to new line. So let's add underscore space. Let's remove this one. And before range, we are gonna add the sheet name or code name for this sheet 2, which was rates sheet. So let's add that. We add rates, Control space, and we see it here. For some reason it's removing the actual words. So before it removed cells and now it removed range. So let's add it back. Range dot range. And now we are telling VBA that the lookup value is coming from the main sheet and the lookup range is coming from the rate sheet. So let's move the cell here and let's click on run to see if this works. And boom, we get our unit price as return. Sweet, right? We don't have to manually copy and paste XLOOKUP formula anymore each time. There's actually another way to do this. You can skip ahead if you prefer to use the earlier method that I just explained. In this method, we will rename our worksheets as main and rates. So the worksheet we have is this one. So let's rename them. We're gonna call this main, and the second one we are just gonna call it rates. Great. Now we're gonna make some changes in our VBA code to make this work. So I'm going to declare two new variables, which will be of data type worksheet. So let's declare them. You can declare more than one variables in the same line. You just have to use them once and each time just separate it with a comma. So we are declaring two new variables, WS main for worksheet main and WS rates for worksheet rates. Now we are going to assign variables to these worksheets that we do using the set keyword. So now what it's doing is WS main is associated with this worksheet, that is main, and WS rates is associated with the rates worksheet. Now what you can do is you can simply replace WS main here instead of main sheet and WS rates here instead of rate sheet. It works very similar what we have already done. It's just a different way to do it, just with more steps involved. Right, so let's keep going. Now we need to multiply this unit cost with the units from main sheet and subtract from total. So let's do that. We already have our lookup value. So what we are going to do is we are just going to wrap this inside of parentheses and multiply it with the units from our data. So let's say multiply, and here again we are going to use cells. This will actually come within this parentheses. So we will say cells, and the value we want 225 to multiply is with 27. So this value is coming from 5th column, active row, and 5th column. So let's use that. Again, row is the first one and 5th is the column number, and parentheses close. And last thing we are going to do is we are going to subtract the actual total amount from the whole thing. So we're going to use cells. Again, we will use AR, and column number we are going to hard code for now. It should be 6th column. Right, so let's test it and let's see if it works. So I'm just going to remove these two values, put the cursor over here, run it, and good enough. We have a difference of $100, which means that we are being overcharged by $100. If we test our calculation, we can test. So for example, we have 27 units and each unit costs us $225, and 27 multiplied by 225 comes to 6075, and what we received was 6175, which means that we have $100 overcharge with our carrier. Alright, so we got our code to working condition, and we can now add this to our main code inside of user form once enter data is clicked. So let's do that. This line is the only relevant line we have because we already have AR inside of our main code. We just added this here so we can test our code separately and then add in the bigger code block. So let's copy this, go out to our main code block, click on enter data, and here before we unload the user form, let's perform this step as well. And now instead of active cell.form, let's specify this and add this to a new column. So let's call it diffx for difference, and let's add a better way to do this here. So let's say cells AR, and this is gonna be 7th column, so let's add 7, and let's add some more data, and let's check if our code works. Alright, so this time we're gonna open up Martha, and let's see what Martha has done. Alright, so let's start adding our data. F8 to access the VBA. We're gonna say display user form. The second one is a test lookup we just created. We are gonna remove it later on. Open the user form, and let's start adding the information here. So we have invoice number 100, invoice date is 7/8/2024, customer name is Martha, we have television as item description, invoice is 95, and the total cost we have is 113,815. Great. Alright, so as soon as we enter data, we should get our new data in this line, and in diffx column we should get a difference of the total amount that is being invoiced. Right, so we have some error. Let's check it out what the issue is. Great, so we have some error, so let's see what the error could be. So everything was working fine till here. Alright, so we don't have the AR here, the active row, so we need to add the active row here. So we set dim AR as integer, and we're just gonna declare AR equals active cell dot row. Alright, so let's try to run this again. Let's add the same information again. So this is invoice number 100. This has 7/8/2024. We have Martha here. We have television here. Hopefully I've spelled it correctly. Invoice starts 95 and 113,815. So as soon as we press enter, we should get the difference as well. And as you can see, we have the difference here. Interestingly, it's on the above line because this was the active row. So let's remove this and let's add this for a new invoice just to test it, because this should always, the difference should always come in the active row, which is what we wanted. So let's do this side by side, and this say invoice number, my bad, let's pull this through user form. We have invoice number 105, we have 7/1/2024 is invoice date, customer name is Timothy, we have item as cell phone again, we have 27 units, and our total cost is 6,075. Click on enter data, and great, we have the data entered, and we also have the diff column as 0. Let's enter another one, Herman. Let's quickly add the data for this as well. Right, so it seems like we have a difference of 2180 in this invoice. So if we go through and debug this, so let's say 90 units of television, and we have the cost at 1198. Let's do this manually, and the total comes to 10,7,820, and the difference is to 180, which means that we have pulled the correct difference, and our user form is correctly pulling difference. Right, so now we can reach out to our carrier for the discrepancy and ask him what the difference is coming from. In our coming steps, we will add a data validation inside of the user form for the number of items, because we know we have limited items here. We will also add integration for Outlook emails, so we can automatically generate emails through this Excel file, and as soon as we enter data and there's an issue with the amounts, we should be able to send out an email to our carrier telling him that there's an issue with this invoice and he needs to fix it. For our next step, let's add a drop down list to our item description, since we know we have a fixed set of items that can be selected. Let's jump back to VBA window by pressing Alt F11, and then we will say item DESC for description. Right, so you have your combo box renamed. Next, let's create a new code block for user form initialization. So any code you want to run at initialization, this is where you would want to enter. So let's go to user form, and here let's create a new code block. So we will say private sub user form initialize, and we will get an end sub automatically. So our required data is available on rates tab, so we will pick the number of items from this column. We will need to skip the header row, which is this one. Everything else we will need to pick it up. And keep in mind that we renamed our rates sheet internally to rates sheet. So the way to add values to a combo box is using add item. So we'll say add item. Now the way to use it is we will start with me, that represents the user form itself. Then we will access the combo box. So we type CBO and our combo box was CBO item description. Then we will access add item feature. And here you can give any value that you want to be added to your user form. So for example, let's just type manually for now desk, and that's it. What we are gonna do is we're gonna save and close, and let's try to run this again and see if our user form is able to pick up this value from the drop down. So back to user form, click on run, and you can see once we click on drop down we can see our desired value. Now the problem is that you can add values this way, but what you will have to do is you will need to copy and paste all of these rows and then change value, but that again will be hard coded, which is not good idea. So what we will do is we will use a for loop. So we're gonna say for I equals x to x, and then we will say next I. So the x to x value I'm just gonna replace. So we know that we need to loop from second value up till the last value, so we need to find a way to figure out what the last row for this column is. For that we will use Excel function count a. So let's do that. We will clear a new variable, so let's call dim counter. We will use counter as a new variable name as integer, and the value of counter will be equals to application dot worksheet function dot count a. If you don't know, in Excel count a is simply used to count any non-blank values in a column. So for example, if we select this, we should get a value that is 6. Open up the formula. So for that we will need to refer this worksheet here, that was rates sheet. We control space to autofill, and then we'll say range, and here we'll give range A through A, just like we did in the Excel formula, and we just put it equals to the counter variable. Now keep in mind that this counter variable is going to store but there's a typo, so let me see. Alright, so there's missing parentheses. Okay, so the counter value is going to store 6 in this, so we need to loop from 2 through 6. So what we are going to do is we are going to fix the starting loop value, that is 2, and the ending loop value will be counter. Now the good thing about this is that if your data increases or adds up in future, this will be dynamic and it will ensure that it runs from 2 through the last value you have in the list. Great. So here we are just going to replace desk with, again we will refer this rates sheet dot cells, and here what we are going to do is we are going to use I as the row index because we're starting from 2, so first value will be 2, and then we will give the column number, which is 1. Right, great. So this is hopefully going to add all of our values in our user form list. So let's test our code. Run this, and boom, you are able to see all of the items that are available in our rates tab. One problem is solved. The next thing we are going to do is we need to come up with a way that as soon as we enter our data, and if there's a difference in the difference column, we would like an email to be drafted and sent to whomever we need to send it to. So I already have a video on my channel. So this video has the code for how to draft an email from Excel using Outlook. So let's get the code from here and let's add it to our main Excel VBA window. Right, so this is a dummy code. As you can see, 2 values, CC values, subject values, all are dummy values. It's just a template to create emails directly from our Excel sheets. So go back to our Excel, and within this same code block we will add a new code block. So let's just paste it here. The name is send reminder email. We're just going to change it, so we will say send email for discrepancy. Great. So now what we are going to do is we will simply call this macro each time whenever our code runs and there's a difference amount in this cell. So let's add a simple code for this. Before the user form unloads or closes, we will add a new code block. So we will start an if else. So we will say if, we will again refer to the main sheet, that is main sheet, and we will say dot cells, and we will say AR, so the active row and the 7th column, which is the column for difference. it's not equal to 0, then so what we are saying is that we want this code to run each time when there is a difference in the difference column. And the code is, it's simply going to call our code here, that is send email. So let's type send control space, okay, and we simply say end if. So if there is a no difference in this column, this code will not call for this email code. Okay, I forgot to add 0 here, so add 0 here, and now our code block is complete. Right, so what we are going to do is let's test it. Simply add dummy data for another invoice. So click on save. From here, let's call the macro. Let's add some dummy values. So we're going to say 108, date we use for today, customer name, we're just going to say Herman. As you can see, I pressed tab and this box is not being accessed by the tab. So it means that we need to fix the tab order, which we will do later. Click on drop down and let's select television again. Invoice units, we're going to use same from here. So let's say 90, and let's just again type 110 123, and as soon as we press enter data, we should get the data entered and a new empty email drafted from our Outlook ready to be sent. Okay, so seems like there's an error. Let's see what the error is. Okay, so it's trying to find this text box which we actually changed. So let's just change this value to CBO combo box item description, and we continue to press run. We continue our code. Yeah, so we got our data entered and we have our test email drafted. From here you can simply add the email addresses in a separate column. So let's just add some dummy usernames. So let's say @ and then we concatenate hotmail.com, as simple as that. And what you can simply do is you can point your macro to pick up value from this column. You could also add a dynamic subject in a specific column here. Let's say you want to add a column here for subject, and then for CC values you will add a value here, and you can simply modify your macro, this one, to pick up values from that specific row. Right, so with this I would like to wrap up this long video on user forms. I hope this was a fun project for you as much as it was for me, and you learned something new. Till next time, happy learning.